Yeah, so as you said, I am a researcher on the Autism from Menstruation to Menopause project, and we're looking at the gynecological and reproductive health of autistic people with wombs at Swansea University. But this presentation's on autistic adjustments at university, because I've written this book that is aimed at autistic people starting university. There's also guidance for educators and parents as well. So I'm going to talk a bit about the content of that book to do with adjustments. I'm going to try not to use the term reasonable adjustments because I really don't like that term. Because in my experience, I've never really met an autistic person that's asked for an unreasonable adjustment. I think that if you need something to be able to learn, then that's perfectly reasonable. So I might catch myself out, but I'm going to try not to use that term. It's also worth saying that this presentation isn't going to attempt to overhaul the entire education system or make systemic change, but rather try to suggest changes that will help people already within the system at university. This is my book. So a wonderful shout out to my illustrator, Jonathan Raisborough, for his excellent illustrations throughout the book. And then there's a little discount code. I'll show it at the end as well, though, so don't worry if you miss it this time. It's worth saying there's quite, because of where I'm based, a UK focus, but hopefully it will be relevant to people across the world. And I've had feedback from people in Australia and the US who have read my book and still found it helpful. So first of all, I think before university, adjustments start well before you actually arrive at university. And I think the best thing for autistic people is to actually visit university as soon as possible. And I say this because university isn't for everyone. Not everyone's going to like it. And realizing that as soon as possible can really help you before you get invested in a course that you then realize isn't for you. And then you can take other avenues. When I was at sixth form, we went within the first month of year 12 or whatever the equivalent is where you are. And that really helped me to realize that, yes, this is the place that I want to go. Other adjustments needed for autistic people around this time would be adjustments with exams for university. So aside from the sort of statutory exams, some universities have their own entrance procedures and interviews, and it's really important to make sure that autistic people have adjustments for these exams as well. Another thing that I think can be helpful is to start the application process a little bit earlier. So in the UK, there are often two deadlines, one for Oxford and Cambridge and medicine, and one for other universities and courses. And it can be quite helpful for autistic people to get it out of the way a little bit sooner and to start the process a bit sooner, just to take that stress off. And it also means that you have the summer beforehand to plan all of those applications rather than trying to do it alongside the exams that you're taking. As part of my research, I contacted over 90 universities. Not all of them responded, but the ones that did gave me a lot of information about adjustments that they had for their open days. Some of these include, for instance, having quiet rooms to go to be able to deregulate, because it can be a very overwhelming environment. Other examples are having separate tours with smaller groups rather than the group of 20 people at once. And some tours even led by autistic students themselves, which I think is particularly helpful. There were also online open days. However, if you're planning to go to university in person, I would caution against these because you really don't get a feel of the university. They may have an excellent online open day, but then you get there and you realise it's not for you. So if you are planning to go to university in person, I think visiting the university where possible is definitely important. Arriving at university, the number one thing that I say is if you can arrive early, then do that. And this is actually very easy for universities to facilitate because most universities have 2 move-in dates anyway. And that's because they normally have one for international students and one for home students. So to facilitate an autistic student moving in a couple of days early is really not that difficult, and most will be happy to accommodate this. Being able to choose your kind of accommodation is also important. Some autistic people might prefer a quieter halls, for instance, for people that don't like to going out late or playing music late, and also to be able to choose not to have a shared room or an ensuite. I also suggest that when there's a couple of autistic students, that actually housing them together can be very helpful. In my research, I found that autistic people, as we all know, I'm sure, get on very well with other autistic people. So having someone else with a shared experience can actually be really helpful. Within that first week, it's also good to let people know when the first fire alarm testing will be, because most universities will, for a minute on a Friday morning or something like that, do a fire alarm. And you might have been having a great week so far, and suddenly you are thrown off by this very loud alarm and you don't know what's happening. So small things can actually have a big impact on an autistic person's experience at university. And that is one of the things that I'm like, just tell us when the alarm's going to be. Something I found very helpful, my university did, was a meet and greet with autistic students and staff. So the people that had disclosed that they were autistic were invited, and there were autistic students and autistic staff members there. And that was really lovely to meet an autistic staff member in my department and be able to get to know them before I started my degree. Health and well-being, I think, is the next thing to consider, and things like registering with a doctor as soon as possible and being able to access adjustments for your health and well-being. This can include things like longer doctor's appointments or well-being sessions, extra counselling sessions. Most universities in the UK will offer you 6 sessions a year for counselling. You can request more if you are autistic. That may not be provided without disabled students allowance, but you can ask. You can also ask for autism specialist counsellor or mentor, and as long as there is clear signposting for autistic people. And some universities even have their own autism webpage created by autistic students. Autism peer support groups can also be very helpful for health and well-being, but I'll get onto that a bit later. Staying safe, and I think this is particularly important at the start of university. Many autistic people may have been infantilized before starting university, and therefore may not have the same level of knowledge about things like sex, drugs, and alcohol. And I think it's important that everyone is given the same information regardless of their diagnosis. And I think it's also good for universities to consider that autistic people may have poorer health outcomes than non-autistic people, and to be aware of things like might be more likely to be wearing a mask and be more likely to take time off for sickness. Oh, one back. There we go. Once you've sort of settled in and considered your health and well-being, it's very important, I think, to find people with whom to connect. And university is actually really good for this if you look in the right place, because there's people from all over the world and lots of people like lots of different things. And that's where societies can really help. And there's JCRs or students' unions or whatever the alternative thing is. There's lots of different societies, and you can often create one if you don't have one. And some universities will even have an autism society, as we just played Cards Against Humanity. But it can be a great place to meet people. I think autism peer support groups are also really good. And it involves, obviously you get to meet lots of other neurodivergent people and share that university experience. It can be particularly difficult for autistic people to find their people at university because lots of people get very close very quickly with their flatmates. And quite often these are just 6 random people from across the university. So you're not necessarily going to get on with them. And that can be particularly difficult for autistic people when they see everyone else getting on. And that's why societies and peer support are so important to us. It's important to remember, but as I say this, I'm assuming that you have come out as autistic at university. And that's a very personal decision that I think every autistic person has to make as to whether they disclose the fact that they're autistic, because there is a lot of stigma out there. I personally found it very helpful. I found it helped people to understand me better. And a lot of the time I'd come out as autistic and the answer would be, oh my God, me too. So it was actually really good to have that experience for me, but that is not a universal experience, and it's got to be a very personal and private decision for each person to make. And obviously the reason that you're at university to get a degree. And sometimes reasonable adjustments don't include the academic side, and I think that's a real misstep. So things that you can have for academic adjustments are things such as longer slots with an academic advisor, help with strategies or deadlines. There are autism study skills tutors that are available. Sometimes you have to go through disabled student allowance or whatever funding you have in your country. But there are definitely adjustments to be made. Within a degree, you often have the dreaded group projects. And again, there are adjustments that you can make here. These include being able to do it on your own or not having to present in front of a whole year group, which can be very daunting. You can also request that you're not called upon in lectures. And if you're like me and you like to sit at the end of a row at the back, that can also be accommodated. Small environmental changes where possible, such as removing background noise or lowering lights, can also be very helpful just to reduce that sensory atmosphere while you're trying to learn. When it comes to exams and coursework, there's obviously lots of adjustments, rest breaks, extra time, extensions, and forms for serious adverse circumstances. And I think it's really important that you know where these are, even when things are really good, just in case things get bad, because the last thing you want to be doing is trying to find the paperwork. Another good thing to get your head around in terms of academia is the marking and referencing jargon. It can be quite hard, but once you've nailed it, that's kind of it for the rest of the degree. And I think another thing that autistic people can be susceptible to is when other people ask for help. And this is where understanding plagiarism really comes in. In my own experience, I nearly got into trouble because someone asked to see my reference list. So I said, of course, and I sent them my reference list. Unbeknownst to me, they copy and pasted it onto the end of their essay. And again, you know, I didn't realise, but I would have thought that had been fine. However, obviously, it came back under the referencing software as 100% identical to that part of the work. So it's important to firstly be aware of what is your work and what is someone else's, and secondly, to be aware of what counts as plagiarism. Luckily, I didn't get into trouble for that, but they did tell me to try and stop helping other people. There's lots of tools that can help you. I quite like Goblin tools. It will break down one task into lots of little tasks. It's good for us ADHDers. It will also, if you've got a load of ingredients, make you a recipe. So that's quite good, but that's nothing to do with academia. In terms of academia, there's also lots of opportunities, such as placements and years abroad. And it's good to consider these extra early because sometimes the deadlines come during that dreaded second year, which is arguably the worst year of a degree, when you're trying to do lots of other things at the same time. And then what next after a degree? You can, like me, stay at university for 9 years, or you can get out as soon as possible and get a job. And this can be quite a stressful bit, again, when you're taking your final year exams and you're trying to work out everything. So autistic people having extra help here can be really advantageous for gaining good employment after a degree. When it comes to work, access to work in the UK is a really good resource. I'm sitting here with a monitor, a desk and a chair purchased by Access to Work. And they can also provide mentors and things like that. But there's lots of different options, and the careers advisors are normally quite good because the university looks good if you get a job quite soon afterwards. But it's also worth remembering, and I talk about this in the book, and I have contributors throughout my book that are autistic themselves and they contribute. And what a lot of them found was that they're very burnt out after their A-levels or after their degree, and that actually going straight into a job isn't the best for them. And I had one contributor who, instead of going straight into a degree, did a foundation degree first. They didn't need to because of their results, but they chose to do that just because of being so burnt out after 14 continuous years of education to just do a bit of study before their undergraduate degree. So it's important also to know that while everyone is planning their future and these jobs and things, that you can just take a step back because you have to look after yourself as an autistic person too. So that's kind of a whistle-stop tour of adjustments at university. I've listed off quite a lot, but hopefully that gives you a feel of what's available. And yeah, I'd be happy to know any questions, and there's a little QR code and a discount for the book. That's valid until the end of February. But yeah, thank you.